Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about the synthesis essay, and then I'll talk about the student responses from eminent domain. The synthesis essay, I've given you 90 minutes since you do have some reading material to get through. I want to make sure that your first time doing any of these essays, you're really not pressed for time and you have plenty of time to plan and outline and decide which sources you're going to use where and, make notes as necessary before you actually get started. Now, when you go into the synthesis essay and you enter the code and get into the thing, it's basically just a PDF in the box and then the area where you will type your essay. If for some reason the PDF does not open for you or you have trouble with that, definitely let me know that immediately and maybe give me an idea in your email of how much time you missed out on, if you missed out on time, and I can try and add that to your existing time, assuming that you're still in the assessment. Or we'll work out some other way to get that back. But hopefully the PDF opens just fine. And, if you have printing capabilities, you're welcome to print it. But probably your best bet if you don't is just to kind of, switch back and forth between the two tabs. I obviously will not hold any deviations from the quiz page against you for this, since that's kind of the best option we've got for how to get that information to you. So anyways, that's that. Eminent domain. Let's talk eminent domain. So student responses. Let's open these up. Okay. So starting with student sample A. So sample A had lots of words, a great many words, but unfortunately, sample A did not exactly kill it in terms of points. So I think this is a great example of writing a lot while saying kind of nothing. Sample A only got 2 points out of 6. And the 2 points for row B, they did not get the thesis point because they didn't actually take a position. You cannot say, oh yeah, this thing that you want me to take a position on, well, it's kind of good and it's kind of bad. It just kind of depends. No, that is wishy-washy. That is not qualifying. I know the word qualify sometimes throws people off, but that is not qualifying effectively. That's just avoiding taking a position. So they did not get the thesis point for that, one of the only essays that did not get the thesis point. And they did not get the sophistication point, just 2 points for attempting to provide some evidence, referencing a few sources, albeit without much commentary. Okay, sample B. Sample B was much more better. It got 5 out of 6 points. The only point it lost was an evidence point in row B for some evidence commentary deficiencies. Got everything else. Got the sophistication point, which was good. There's actually a pretty decent number of these essays that got the sophistication point compared, I feel like, to the other student responses that we looked at. But anyways, I digress. Sample C. Sample C got 1 point. They got a point for the thesis, and that's it. So you can kind of see how, sample A, they wrote easily 3 times as much as sample C, but the scores really weren't that different because, even though sample C was rubbish, sample A was actually kind of close in terms of rubbish. So anyways, 1 point for thesis. They did manage to take a position. Sample D. Sample D only got 4 points, which isn't horrific. They missed a point in the evidence category, and they missed the sophistication point. They did get point for thesis, and they got 3 out of the 4 of the evidence points. So, all in all, pretty good for sample D. Sample E was excellent. Sample E was one of our perfect scores. So, lengthwise, I don't think it's much different than sample A, but they clearly stated the thesis, they got all of the points for evidence and commentary, and they introduced some sophistication into their argument. Okay, sample F, on the other hand, only got 3 points. They got the thesis point, 2 points for evidence, and 0 sophistication points. Okay, sample G. Sample G only got 1 point, and their 1 point was an evidence point. This is the only other essay that did not get a thesis point and never actually took a position. So, anyways, sample G, quite rubbish. Sample H. Sample H was not so much rubbish. It got 5 out of 6 points. Just like Sample B, it only missed out on 1 point in the evidence category in row B. So yeah, all around, pretty good. Many words. Sample I. Sample I was our other perfect score. It got 6 out of 6 points. It was probably the bestest. If you wanted to compare the two perfect scores, it probably edged out Sample E a little bit. But, they both got the points. They both got the job done. They were sophisticated. They had evidence and commentary. They had thesis statements. It's quite nice. So anyways, let's talk about them in more detail now. And as always, if you want to kind of check out, if you're feeling good about why they got the points that they did, then by all means, please do so. Sample A. So, Sample A, as I said, did not take a position. So no thesis point there. At no point in their essay did they clearly state, in one finite sentence, this is, what an eminent domain is. The eminent domain is good. Eminent domain is bad. Nothing. Now, evidence-wise, they did have evidence, and it did relate to the subject of the prompt. Obviously, it couldn't relate to their thesis because they didn't have that one. But the commentary was real rough. The commentary that explained the connections, it oversimplified the evidence. Sometimes it misinterpreted the evidence, overgeneralized sources, and stated that the sources related to the subject, but didn't actually draw on specific information from the sources. So the biggest problem with this one was it was too general. There were not enough specifics. They managed to say a whole lot without saying very much at all. And Rossi just really wasn't sophisticated. You can't really misinterpret the sources and have a complex understanding of something. It just doesn't quite make sense. Okay, on to sample B. All right, find my notes on sample B. Sample B, much more better. There was a clear thesis in sample B. The ends do not justify the means. So that is, obviously some anti-eminent domain sentiment. Unethical, un-American. So definitely a clear opinion on that. They had evidence that related to the thesis. The commentary was just inconsistent. They had sections with good commentary, and they had sections where there wasn't quite so much commentary. That was really the only thing that knocked off that last point. A couple other comments were kind of blanket comments, a little bit vague, a little bit general. This is probably someone who did not know what eminent domain was before they wrote about it and maybe didn't spend enough time looking into the sources to understand it fully. The commentary ended up restating information more than adding observations, if that makes sense. So it veered a little bit more into summary land than analysis land, is I guess how I'd like to think of it. But Rossi, they did situate the argument in a broader context. That's why they got the sophistication point. So remember, anytime you're dealing with a synthesis essay or an argument essay, addressing counter-arguments and concessions is key to getting that sophistication point. So in this essay, they made a concession right off the get-go in paragraph 1, and said the most common defenses for eminent domain, while well-intended, are ultimately built on flawed concepts that go against the American value of individual freedom. They then reiterated that in paragraph 4 and said that, especially over the past few decades when corporations have had a major hand in politics, eminent domain, as we know it, is a civil rights violation that destroys poor and minority communities in favor of corporate profit. So concessions and understanding the big picture, how eminent domain had far-reaching implications for people in the world. So was it the best of sophisticated things? No, I mean, it wasn't, the most amazing sophistication I've ever seen, but they got the job done. And it just comes down to, making sure to make note of those things, concessions and broader context, and that is key. Okay, sample C. Baby sample C. So, sample C, so short, so sad. Sample C, not a lot going on here. Only 1 out of 6 points. The only good thing that it had was a thesis. Let's see, where is their thesis? Yes, here. The government utilizing, I think they meant utilizing, eminent domain can be so helpful in many ways, like considering better facilities for transportation, better buildings, and better ways of supplying water. So I would just like to make a note that in spite of the horrible, spelling and punctuation mistakes, that actually was not mentioned as something that, was taken off for them. It really was just their lack of anything else good. So, it's a mess. There are no source citations. That's another mark against it, and that was specifically mentioned in the AP analysis of this. So having those little parentheses with source A and source B and stuff like that, it matters. They care. Don't forget it. So no source citations, really vague. It just doesn't connect anything to anything, and that's all I can say about sample C. Okay, let's move on to sample D. So sample D, verging in a slightly upward direction, gets 4 out of 6 points. Defensible thesis, which is in fact the whole of paragraph 1. This is a 1-sentence introduction. It gets the job done. The thesis is there. They got credit for the thesis. It introduced their topic. Bam. So, if you're freaking out, running short on time or anything like that, you can get away with a 1-sentence first paragraph. And that's fine. It's honestly better to write a really short one than a really long one that doesn't do anything scoring-wise. Okay, so then evidence. They had 3 sources. I think actually more than 3 sources, maybe. Let's see, source A, source D, and then the source F. Actually, no, just 3, sorry. I may be thinking of another one. So they had their 3 sources, and they had a line of reasoning, and it related to the thesis. The commentary didn't always support their claims. So they made claims. The claims were good. The claims could have been supported, but they didn't really take it to the next level and actually support those things. So their commentary had limited explanation of the relationship between their evidence and the line of reasoning for the thesis. Even if it feels repetitive, even if you feel like it's implied by what you're saying, just really explicitly state, how the evidence you're providing supports your line of reasoning. Don't summarize the evidence you're providing, but explain how it supports your line of reasoning, how it connects to whatever reason it is you're covering in that paragraph. This one missed out on sophistication. It was accused of being repetitive. Now, repetition, good thing. Repetitive, bad thing. It just means that you're repeating yourself, maybe because you don't know what else to say. They had a little personal example in paragraph 4, and that was like an attempt to contextualize the argument, but it didn't really provide significant insight or sophistication of thought, so it ultimately didn't take it anywhere. So, they tried. We give them, a little mental credit for trying, I suppose, but ultimately it didn't really take it to the level that was necessary for that sophistication point. Okay, sample E. Sample E, one of our even more better explanations. Here's my notes on sample E. They're all out of order. Okay, so row A. Very nice thesis, very defensible position. Across the country, vibrant neighborhoods and private properties are threatened by the power of eminent domain. Obviously, eminent domain, bad thing. The evidence was thorough. They had a minimum of 3 sources, so that was good. You definitely always want to meet that minimum. If you only do 1 or 2 sources, you are automatically losing points, no matter how amazing your explanation is. Let's see, they've got a very thoughtful line of reasoning, even with some concessions and things, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But let's see, they talk about the abuses of eminent domain, the dangers of these abuses. They make a connection between bias and unfair compensation. Nice transitions. So, like this transition from paragraph 3 to paragraph 4. This is nice, good, classy, sophisticated. And then, speaking of sophisticated, broader context really came through for this one. So in paragraph 1, they presented a relevant personal example that actually provided some more understanding of the issue. I don't know if they're from Maryland or something. I have no idea how they pulled this out. I thought maybe it was like something in one of the articles, but it's not in there. So yeah, this is a really interesting kind of personal connection and really shows that they understand eminent domain. And I'm sure that when they saw this prompt, they were like, "Oh my God, I know what that is. That happened in this city." And so that was definitely a real win for them. They also provided counter arguments and refutation. They even used the word counter argument. So that's definitely a clear, what's the word I'm looking for? A clear sign of sophisticated argumentation. So the counter argument, use of eminent domain, is the people whose homes have been taken from them will have a new benefit to look forward to, such as a highway, community center, or park. But when your home has been taken from you, that's not great. So anyways, point being that even though this essay is not perfect, it has everything it needs. It gets the job done. They clearly understood the issue well enough, to talk about it. So, anyways, on to sample F. Sample F, going down the score ladder just a bit, was another one of our 3 out of 6. Actually, nope, it's the only 3 out of 6 one. It did get the thesis point, defensible position. Eminent domain is productive and useful because it can open up opportunities and benefit many people. So they were pro eminent domain, which is fine. They did have evidence. They had 3 sources, but the commentary was pretty rubbish. The commentary ended up repeating their source information, oversimplifying it. In the second paragraph, they essentially just repeated their evidence in their commentary. The repetition just doesn't work. If it's overly repetitive, it doesn't actually show that you understand it and that you can connect it to your line of reasoning. And just for some, just little to no explanation, source D was kind of rubbish. I don't know what the 8's there. I think that was a typo. Sorry. Okay. Row C, no complexity, very little understanding of the topic. It just didn't go anywhere. They tried, but alas. Sample G. So sample G, another 1 out of 6 points. The statement that attempted to be a thesis ended up just being summary. Many people are reluctant to agree that eminent domain is beneficial. Stating that many people don't think it's beneficial is not really the same as stating it is not beneficial. So they tried at a thesis, but it wasn't clear. It's just a matter of perception at the end. No, it's not. If you have read the articles and you have developed an opinion on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, then just say it. Just state it. Don't wishy-washy your way around it. So, yeah, thesis was rough there. Row B, it did use 3 sources. Believe it or not, they were in there. Actually 4. Oh no, sorry, 3. Almost twice. So, anyways, they did have 3 sources, but there was pretty much no commentary that actually connected the sources. There were like a few brief phrases, and they just didn't have enough in there to really get good credit for that. They didn't explain how the evidence supported the argument. Very, very general, very, very vague, and no complexity whatsoever. So that was rough. Okay, on to sample H. Sample H, much better than sample G, was another one that got 5 out of 6 points. So sample H had a thesis with a defensible position. They gave out their, they're kind of like, these are what my paragraphs are going to be about, which is fine. Your thesis can do that, or it doesn't necessarily have to. I think that in a synthesis essay, it's kind of nice when you give yourself those sort of like categories, like this paragraph is going to focus on this reason, and this paragraph is going to focus on this reason, because I think it helps keep you organized, but it's entirely up to you. So then on to the evidence. Commentary sometimes supported the line of reasoning. So it's another one where the commentary was there, but there wasn't just quite enough of it, or it wasn't explicit enough. And some of the explanations were kind of incomplete, little vague. So for example, I'm trying to find like a specific sentence to point that out to make it clearer. And I'm having trouble finding the sentence that I'm looking for. Where's the sentence that starts with ultimately? Wow, really having trouble here. Okay, well, if I find whatever I was looking for, I did have one in mind, and my eyes are, oh, here we go, right here. Ultimately, families are displaced, and the communal social fabric of poorer communities is broken. So it's a nice sentence. It's got decent, diction and stuff in there, but it's just a little bit vague and doesn't talk about the specifics of, how families are displaced by eminent domain and how these poorer communities have been broken. It kind of has some fancy language, but nothing really backing it up. Okay. Sophistication. It did actually get the sophistication point because they had a concession. So see how this is going for some of these essays. Even if their evidence and commentary isn't 100% there, they're still getting that sophistication point because they acknowledge circumstances where their argument may not be valid. So the last paragraph here, government ambitions involving eminent domain are not always harmful. They're conceding that, like, yeah, okay, sometimes it can be a good thing. However, and they bring it back to their original point, becomes unethical when governments work closely with private industries, cause social inequalities, unnecessary displacements, corruption, and unfulfilled promises. So they really thoroughly kind of beat down, this counter argument and say that, like, yeah, sure, it might do some good things, but the bad things it does definitely outweigh it. So anyways, nice job with the concession there, getting that last little point. And finally, sample I, and Donna on a good one. So sample I had beautiful things, delightful things. Hopefully you learned much about eminent domain from sample I. If I can find my notes on sample I, there they are. So lovely thesis. It was a kind of multi-sentence thesis, but again, that's okay. They put a decent amount of time into this first paragraph, but we're hoping that they saved enough time for their other essays too. And they really thoroughly introduced the topic, kind of qualified the position. So this is how you qualify a position. Rather than just saying, well, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, where they acknowledge that it can be misused, but it is a vital tool. So, I mean, that's clear, specific opinions, not just sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Eminent domain can be bad in these situations, but eminent domain can be good in these situations. So anyways, if you're going to qualify, you have to be specific. Otherwise, it all falls apart and you may even lose your sad thesis point. Okay, evidence. Evidence clearly relates to the thesis. The commentary has specific details from the sources that are very well incorporated, I would say. Some very nice, smooth incorporation of the evidence. And they develop important ideas throughout the essay. They integrate source information and provide well-developed commentary. There's a really effective relationship drawn between the evidence and the thesis. And that's really what it's all about, is like that commentary has to connect the evidence to the thesis. You feel like you're beating a dead horse, but connect the evidence to the thesis. Time and time again, that's what it really comes down to do that consistently. Row C, it got the point because it had that broader context. In the first paragraph, they acknowledged the occasional failures of eminent domain, but asserted that they were overshadowed by the resounding successes of many of the larger, often nationwide attempts of the government to construct much needed infrastructure. In the third paragraph, they continued that. And let's see, they also had, just in addition to their concessions and counter arguments and, kind of qualifying and acknowledging both sides of the situation, they had really good vocabulary, in the hopes, impoverished areas, in the hopes of seducing a business and revitalizing the town. Really excellent vocabulary. And they had really vivid, persuasive style. They even had some figurative language. I can't find it now, but there was something about a vacuum cleaner in here, the societal vacuum cleaner, and then the death knell of a fading town. So really descriptive, powerful language that honestly I think might have gotten them the sophistication point, even if they hadn't had those other concessions. But as it was, they had like 3 different reasons for getting the sophistication points instead of just one. So that's great. Okay, so those are explanations for synthesis. So definitely use 3 sources. Definitely make sure to have your citations in there in whichever way is best for you. Doesn't really matter, but if you have your whole essay without parentheses, there's a problem. Think about your vocabulary, think about your counter arguments and concessions, think about your transitions. All of those things matter just as much as the foundation of your argument. The argument, of course, is primary. Make sure to have good reasons for whatever position you take on the issue. And if you are feeling very confident, then you can go ahead and see what the issue is now. So, synthesis essay 1 under week 11, Monday, can begin now. Email me with questions.